We'll now move on to the next session. The panel will be on disability and accessibility in times of emergency. Mikhail will be the moderator for this session.
It's always the more challenging task of leading a session, first of all after Rama, and also after lunch. So thank you everybody that is sitting here with us. And I hope you will leave in an hour and say, an hour well spent. Happy I didn't use it for a nap. We'll do the nap later.
Just in case.
Yeah. Yeah, Rama is, the best way to follow Rama is to include Rama. So we did that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is a quick, like 10-minute presentation of each one of us, talking about something that is important for all of us. You know, we're all living our daily lives, each one in their country, in their city, with the means that they have available. But it's many times we realize too late that although we all know a crisis or an emergency can occur at any given time, we don't really take the time to prepare in advance. And this is what this session is all about. And I really hope that each and every one of you will leave here with the understanding and the clarity as we, and the wish to lead really a change for that in our organizations, in our cities, and in our countries. So a presentation and the clicker for the slides, if that is possible. And I'll open with a video, a short video that I think you have. We will open with that. Or at least I hope we will. You have a short video that was sent to you? Shelley? In the first presentation. Okay, so I'll introduce myself first of all. Michal Rimon, I'm the CEO of Access Israel. And as people who know me know, I always like to introduce myself as the proud CEO, proud of the accomplishments about the projects that we have, but most of all of the people, my employees, volunteers, partners who enable us not to only dream, but also to fulfill. I come all the way from Israel, but I'm very happy to be part of the global village of accessibility doers. And I think we have a panel tomorrow about that, but joining hands like this, like we're doing right now, is what it's all about. We have the video? So quick video just to get you into the vibe. And I will describe it right after, it's very short. Should we wait or continue? I can sing. Should I wait or? We can start, okay. So, the video you're going to see now is something that we see every day in every building we go into. You know those signs of accessibility, of emergency exits, the signs that are supposed to really be the beacons, guide us through emergency times. So we were looking at those signs when we started dealing with Purple Vest, which I will explain in a second. And we understood that all of those signs are designed for the quote-unquote regular person, not taking into account special needs or disabilities, resulting in the fact that many of those signs lead to inaccessible solutions. And this is what this is all about, and because it's taking so long, I will start with presenting the project, and you'll just put on the slide. So, I'll tell you a story. Access Israel is operating in Israel, but we have a great network of international friends and colleagues. And last year, you remember December 3rd, many buildings all over the world were lit with the color purple, with a message, leaving no one behind. In many places, it's promoting inclusive employment. In others, it's just, you know, putting it on the table, leaving no one behind, the largest minority in the world. Well, 3 months later, the war broke in Ukraine. And because of our international contacts, we started receiving more and more calls of people asking for help, asking for advice, because a lot of the generic solutions that were executed during that time in Ukraine and in the countries surrounding Ukraine were simply not accessible. And many of the people with disabilities and the elderly chose, but not really, it's not really that they had a choice, they had to stay behind. They were left behind because the solutions for evacuations were not accessible. The accommodations at the end of the solution to evacuate Ukraine were not accessible. And people stayed behind. One of the cases that was brought to my attention was Saturday morning. I was with my family. I get a call and they say, Michal, an elderly lady and her daughter who is blind and in very, very bad need of dialysis is on a train now from eastern Ukraine to Lvov to get a dialysis. A volunteer is waiting on the track in Lvov. Unfortunately, there were bombings and the train had to divert its course. And they're not going to Lvov. In 6 hours, they're going to a town called Chelm in Poland. Now, I didn't know that town. I don't know anybody there. But we had 6 hours to find a solution. What is that lady going to do? Who's going to meet her? She doesn't speak the language. She doesn't have the money. What is going to happen? Now, with the miracle of networking, we found somebody who knows somebody who's a cousin of somebody and has a brother who lives there. And that person was willing to stand there and wait. The problem is, he doesn't know her. She can't see him. Her elderly mother could hardly interact. And the only thing that I received when they got off the plane is we only see here some people with vests of the Red Cross, but nobody understands what we want, and nobody can help us. And I remember saying, you remember those purple lights, December 3rd? Wouldn't it be great if we had, and I'll model for whoever does not see, a purple vest, and I'm standing up with a purple vest that will mark for people, hello, I'm here for you. I'm here for the people who need accessibility because I know what accessibility is. I might not know it all, but I'm here willing to communicate and assist. That's how the Purple Vest mission started. We started small with helping those individual cases, and we were very lucky, and I understand there's no presentation, Shelley? It's not coming? Okay. I'm doing great, thank you. Yeah, I put a mic on my phone and I'm like Irene. So we started with small cases. We were very, very fortunate to be approached by the Nippon Foundation. It's all, again, network connections and valuable, assisted greatly. And we received funds to help. Now, I can tell you that during that year, one of my biggest aha moments was the fact that I understood, I thought I'm getting into it to evacuate whoever I can, how many, whoever I can reach, I will evacuate. But hey, when we're saying leave no one behind, we have to remember we have to ask the people what they want. And leaving no one behind many times means, even if they want to stay behind, let's not leave them behind. And let's make sure that we're not just active with evacuation, but we're also doing it for those choosing to stay behind. I see the, but I'll skip the video. I mean, it's not working. Next slide, please. The next slide. Okay. You said I'm doing good, right? Yeah. So I'll just continue. Okay, here's the next slide. And it's still not working. Good. So here I'll just mention something I forgot. I said I'm the CEO of Access Israel. Mind the very important fact, access is our name. It's not a goal. We're not talking here about a goal of accessibility. Accessibility is a means to an end. The end is true inclusion in regular day-to-day life, but also in times of emergency. Next slide. And when we're talking about the largest minority in the world, and I can tell you that when we started operating in Ukraine, what might be obvious for me is not necessarily obvious for everyone. Because we're coming, you know, during crisis, people and volunteers from all over the world are coming, and not everybody is coming from countries with the same definition of what disability means. So it's very important for me always in trainings to come and say, we're talking about everyone. Everyone who has some kind of disability that affects in a significant way one or more areas of life. It can be work, it can be home, it can be family, it can be communication. But I always say, you know, think of the hand. If my little pinky finger will be cut off, I'll be paying for 10 fingers in manicure, getting only 9. That will be a bummer, but it's not that big of a deal unless I'm a pianist and I need all 10 fingers. However, if my thumb will be cut off, that's already a major thing, because many things that I open in the kitchen or use for work are going to be not possible for me. So whenever people ask me, wait, is this also considered a disability for Purple Vest? I always say, first of all, look at the hand. Is it a pinky or a thumb? And besides, if you have a doubt, better, you know, provide the help and assist, because many of the disabilities, as we know, are non-visible. 70% of the people with disabilities, you cannot necessarily see at first glance their disability, and they're also included in this statistics. The next slide. Let's try. Okay, you remember the purple. I know my slides, so these are the lights we were talking about. And next slide. And this was the mission. So the Purple Vest was to come and to say, guys, let's not just shake our head and say, 6 hours in Chelm, what are we going to do? Let's make sure we're prepared in advance to create a task force and a methodology of things that are already out there but can assist in times of emergency. Next slide. Now, whenever we talk about, next slide. You can skip to the next one. I'll just try to, yeah. Whenever I talk about Purple Vest, and I need to do it really quick, I always look at these 4 visuals. And this is, for me, the essence of the Purple Vest. The first is the mirror. You know how you many times look in conferences, sit in conferences, hear about that project that is going on over there with those people. This is not that type of a project. Purple Vest is look in the mirror and understand this is affecting you. This is relevant to you. While I was doing my thing in Ukraine, there was an episode in Israel that we had to run to shelters. There was an earthquake in Turkey. There were hurricanes in Florida. So things can happen all over the world all the time. And, you know, even if there's nothing major happening, a fire can break. A flooding can occur, etc. So look at the mirror, because what we're talking about here can be relevant and affect everyone. The second is the ear. One of the most important things I've learned, I might consider myself an expert, but hey, you have to understand that you cannot just listen to, you cannot just hear what's happening on the ground. You have to listen to the voices and to what the needs are. Don't assume, don't be paternalistic. And then we have the wheel. Don't reinvent the wheel. One of the things we saw in Poland and in Ukraine, a lot of amazing initiatives are there on the ground, are there in the countries themselves. We're not there to replace them. We're there to enhance, to assist whenever we can. So don't reinvent the wheel when the wheel is already rolling. Maybe you just adjust it or provide any assistance that they want. And the most important thing in Purple Vest is connect the dots. I'm in Israel, I'm not in Ukraine. I couldn't be there, but still, I could use my networks, I could use my connections, I could connect the dots and create the sequence that is so crucial for accessibility. Next slide, I'll try to speed things. I won't go into this slide. I'll be more than happy to share it with anybody sitting here, but we always have to remember, emergency is tough for all. For people with disabilities and the elderly, there's the additional challenge. And the additional, and I think the one thing that we have to remember is the generic doesn't work for people with disabilities and the elderly in times of emergency. Now, we skipped a slide that said, what is Purple Vest? So we have three components. One is knowledge, because when you don't know enough, when you don't have information during times of crisis, that's where it's the toughest. You have to be able to get information that is relevant for you. So we have a website that is open to all of you in all 6 languages of the UN, and we translate it according to needs with the help of our dear friends from Google. We translated many of the things in Turkish, for example, when the earthquake occurred. Number 2 is the task force is really going out there and making sure there are evacuations and there is the sequence of accessibility. And the last is convincing the preparedness. Doing it when you have to do it because the emergency is already there is one thing. Let's get ready in advance. And I can just tell you in numbers that in 8 months, this is what we were able to do. In 8 months, with a lot of help of partners and networking, we were able to evacuate almost 4,000 people. And we're talking about the toughest cases of people with disabilities, elderlies, those who had to be hospitalized or evacuated horizontally, and aided 10,000 people, as I mentioned before the slide came up, that I understood that you're not there just to decide for them that you want to evacuate, you're there to help in whatever way they want, even if they choose to stay behind. So the companionship, the supplies, the assistance, that was part of what the Purple Vest did, and I love the picture on the bottom. For whoever does not see it, it's a train station with the tracks and the train on the right side, and on the left we have a trail of purple vesters carrying and assisting people with disabilities to the train. And I love this picture because this is the essence of it all. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Now, I will, because there is a lack of time and we had some problem at the beginning, I will just explain one thing, and you can already skip to the next slide. What is accessibility? When we are talking and trying to bring this project to people from all over the world, again, with various definitions of what is disability and what is accessibility, I always say that accessibility, when I started working for Access Israel 16 years ago, we were talking about being able to get into a place. You know, that was accessibility, so a wheelchair can roll and get in. But that's not enough, because we don't go into a building and say, yay, we made it, we're in the building, now let's go home. We're there for a reason. So we have the physical accessibility, we have the service accessibility, let's make sure the services that are provided are accessible for all. And of course, we have the social accessibility, which, if I'm talking empathy, this is my probably biggest suit of empathy, because eventually no law in the world and no regulation will make sure that the face you do when a person with disability comes to your restaurant is welcome, instead of, oh, welcome, okay? So these 3 things are accessibility as we know it on daily life. And in order to be included, true inclusion requires all 3 to occur. This is in regular time. Now, next slide, please. When we are talking about accessibility in times of emergency, and I think I heard it here in several of the panels, Christopher mentioned it yesterday in the sea level, you know, don't try to perfect. You know, the middle box here is be creative. Perfect is not the goal. Perfect accessibility in times of emergency is not our goal. We have to remember, you know, all the connecting the dots of the needs in times of emergency, of knowing in advance and understanding the sequence. You have to make sure that accessibility in times of emergency is there from the home, from the get-go, till you reach safety. Having it halfway, having accessibility almost all the way, but then you're stuck in Lvov because from there you don't have an accessible transportation, even though everything else was perfect, that means the person will not be safe. So we have to connect the dots and make sure that the sequence is full. Listening to the grounds is what I told you before. Finding ways to scale up in a sometimes structureless and shaky setting. That is also something we have to remember in times of emergency. It's not your, laboratory conditions. Flexibility is probably one of the most important things when you're dealing with times of emergency. Taking the human factor and turning it into a human ramp, that is what does it many of the times, especially when you plan to go through a place that is perfect accessibility physically, and then a bomb goes off, and the pavement is not accessible. And last thing is egos aside. When we're bringing together, we have to make sure we put the egos aside and are committed to the mission at hand. I think I'm done. If you can just continue the slides. This is the sequence. You can just continue. And these are some pictures from evacuations that were done. I can, of course, elaborate, but I have 3 amazing speakers next to me, which I really want to give an option to share their part of it. I can tell you that 2 of them have participated in one way or another in the Purple Vest, Rama and Sarah, my dear friend from Google. And Angela is our newest friend and member, and tomorrow I'm off to Angela to give full training for this. So I'd love to hear from you guys. Introduce yourself, and then I'd love to hear from you, your take on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Michal. My name is Sarah Bassin. I'm part of the Google contingent that many of you have probably met here. My role within Google was historically, at first, it was accessibility and disability inclusion for people that work at Google. And for the last 2 or 3 years, my focus has been accessibility and disability inclusion in emerging markets. So this is my jam. I'm delighted to be here. I'm also on the board of directors of Enable, and so delighted as a board member to see how this whole event is shaping up. And so with that, I participated in Purple Vest in August of 2022. I'm sure many of you can appreciate if you heard Michal's introduction right now. She talks about it and makes you want to just raise your hand and say, I'm in, how can I help? It's one of her superpowers. Maybe that goes with the social skills that you talked about. So if we can go to the first slide. And we can go to the next slide. So I'll be talking a little bit about the Purple Vest, my Purple Vest experience. And then Michal asked if I could talk about some of the technologies that Google has to offer, which are helpful in situations, in emergency situations. So my personal volunteering experience went for about 3.5 weeks in August of 2022 with my husband. And of course, we're not sent to Ukraine. We went to the refugee center where evacuees had come from Ukraine to Poland. Our slides just went off. But they're on the big screen. So I don't know if there's anything we could do about this screen, or I could just turn around to make sure that I'm on the right slide. No, go back. The refugee center is, I think, a former mall that was converted into these emergency conditions. And these were not people that were in danger anymore. These were people who are now in Warsaw. So it's a different set of needs and requirements for people with disabilities. And let's start with the fact that I didn't even know what those needs were. So I set up a role for myself, and that was interviewing about 50 people with disabilities at the center to identify what are the gaps and what are their needs, which I chronicled, and which are probably useful for emergency refugee situations wherever they occur. So one is, social worker guidance, because clearly people didn't have a good sense, the people with disabilities, as to what are the things they could expect now that they were refugees in Poland. So, and of course, I'm coming from Google, and they wanted me to build them a house. That was a little bit out of scope for me. And so some social worker, actually not as out of scope, I'll tell you in a minute, as some of you may think, medical specialist. There's an infirmary that was wonderful on site, but people were coming to me saying, I need specialty care. And so I need a neurologist. I need more what they have to offer here. And so the possibility of, say, having a central site where specialists are available is a recommended feature, because especially people with disabilities are likely to need more than just infirmary service. Many of them said they needed rehabilitation therapy. That was no longer there. Physical therapy, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, that was also not something that was being offered. Again, probably of benefit to all of the refugees, but particularly people with disabilities, autistic children who were there with their parents, who were now regressing in a couple of months without any support. They were going to ultimately be transitioned to more permanent living accommodations, and what they needed was accessibility in those accommodations. Getting jobs, getting housing, everyone mentioned that. I need money, I need a job, I need a home. Again, a little bit out of scope for me as a volunteer. And that was also the case with all of the refugees, with or without disabilities. But one might say for the people with disabilities or with children with disabilities, maybe they should be moved to the front of the line. It was a wonderful shelter, but there were hundreds of cots in a single location, and a parent is saying, this is really not good for my autistic child. Care for seniors with memory loss. So I met volunteers, basically other refugees who were helping refugees with memory loss who otherwise wouldn't know how to get to the eating area or remember that they had already eaten. And so as other refugees were then being dispersed to other places, this senior person with memory loss would have no support. So it shouldn't really just depend on other volunteers. Next slide. Next slide. And so, again, I was asked to talk about Google technologies that could be useful in these emergency settings. I'll talk about a number that I used while I was there that were enormously valuable. And of course, I used. The truth is, I came and they were already in use by a lot of people who had discovered how critical they were. Next slide. So clearly an obvious one is going to be Google Translate. We had people from Poland, we had people from Ukraine, we had volunteers that spoke any number of languages, and so Google Translate was critical. And then some specific accessibility apps like Live Transcribe, which provides real-time captioning for typically people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and there were some of those in the shelter. So this created an opportunity for communication. Sometimes we were daisy chaining, as in first you translate, and then you use Live Transcribe to translate it to a different language. It was really quite interesting. Google Maps, which now provides information about accessibility of business locations in a way that's very obvious, and so people could know in advance before they go whether indeed this place is known to be accessible based on whether there is wheelchair access or not. And as the person at Google responsible for Google Maps accessibility said, you can have a wheelchair icon, that means you're accessible. You could have a wheelchair icon that is X'd out, that means it is not accessible, and it's not a ding, as in if you are a restaurant that's on the top of a mountain and there's basically not a convenient way to get there, if you are using a wheelchair, anyone with a family that uses a wheelchair will be happy to know that in advance before they make the trip. So it's good for all. And then there are personal safety apps on Android phones that allow you to share emergency information. Now, not only for emergencies, there are all of the other, actually, Alexander spoke in the morning about a number of our technologies. And so these are not specifically for emergencies or even for evacuees. So Lookout, which will describe your physical environment if you are low vision, identify objects in your surroundings. Select to Speak, which is sort of a screen reader light that will read information out for you if you need some additional assistance. Live caption, which will caption basically any audio information on your phone. So these are not specific for emergencies, however, may be even more critical when you are in this evacuee situation. And so something like Lookout, maybe at home you've managed, you're so familiar with your surroundings that you don't need this additional support, but while you are in this setting, it's more critical. So I have on these slides just sort of various images. So Google Translate will translate signage. So use signage in one language, hold up your phone, it'll translate into any number of other languages that you prefer. You could also enter text, and you could also use it in conversation mode. So you speak in one language, and it will speak out in text-to-speech synthesis in another language. Invaluable, because by the time I was there weren't that many English speakers on site. And so if I needed somebody to come and translate, I'm pulling somebody off of some other really critical service operation in order to help me communicate with someone. So the extent to which I could be autonomous in engaging with people was enormously valuable. Next slide.
And it's also not only with the refugees, but also between the volunteers from various countries. So that is very helpful.
I mentioned Live Transcribe, the real-time transcription in over 80 languages at this point. Very easy. You press a button, transcription just appears. So if someone who's deaf is speaking to someone who is hearing, they could easily see what that other person is saying. It also allows you, if you are a deaf user and don't or prefer not to speak, you could also type words. And then another critical piece that is related to emergencies is it gives you sound. It will notify you. There's an indication of various sounds in your environment. Or, are there alarms? Is there a dog barking? Is someone knocking at your door? And you can customize it and actually add sounds that you would like it to give you a visual trigger when it happens if you're not hearing it. Next slide. Google Maps, I mentioned, has now wheelchair accessible information. So as people are in an unfamiliar country, they don't know where they're going. They don't have just the community knowledge of here's a good place and here isn't. The ability to know wherever you are, whether a place is accessible, is invaluable before you make a trip. And the last of this set is, next slide, personal safety apps on an Android phone. And so this goes back to what Michal said, making sure that you can save emergency information on your phone that's then going to be available. You could mark whether you have certain allergies or sensitivities. It will allow you to automatically share your status with contacts, letting them know that you're safe or that you need help, and also give you alerts for public emergencies, earthquake in the area and so on. So a great tool for those of us, and going back to what Michal said, if we can prepare in advance and not be surprised when there are emergencies. And next is wishing safety and peace for all of you. Thank you. Asante sana.
Amazing. Thank you, Sarah, very much. I will say two things. In the last 24 hours, we have been exposed to amazing innovations here, made in Africa. I urge you, each one of you, listen to what we're saying, try to picture the situation, and if you can't picture it, come and talk to us, or come and talk to Angela, living here in Kenya, and try to think if your innovation, as is, or maybe with a small adjustment, can assist. I'll give you an example. We have really just, I'm pulling it, this was not planned, but I met a friend here with an application for the blind that buzzes your watch whenever there's an obstacle in front of you. That would have been helpful. In a refugee center, when there's zillions of people walking around, and hey, a blind person or visually impaired person can walk more freely. Try to think how your innovation can have that extra edge, can help in situations like this. It's a good marketing tool, but hey, it's good, period. And it can help, period. That's number one. And number two, I can tell you that while in the refugee camp, a deaf lady was there after 70 hours on the road. She couldn't read or write. She didn't speak any language, only Ukrainian Sign Language, which is cultural, which is not international. And the only thing that helped us help her is an application, Sign Now, that enabled in 2 minutes to get a translator who translated, and it turns out that she's been running around for 3 hours trying to sign and explain that her daughter is waiting in Bonn. That evening, she was on her way to her daughter. Without the technology, it wouldn't have been possible. So, and Angela.
Just before Angela speaks, time check, 20 more minutes.
How much?
20 minutes.
We started late, so we'll push a little bit more. I'm sure we can, but we'll do our best.
We have another session from 5 to 6, so kindly.
We'll do our best.
We'll be quick.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Angela, please.
Thank you, thank you. My name is Angela Mwai. I'm from UN Habitat, the agency that deals with cities. In fact, we are the custodians of the Sustainable Development Goal number 11. And I had to write it down so I get it right. Make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And that's our raison d'etre. That's what we do every day of our lives. So thank you, Enable, for inviting us here. We are a global agency, so my work is global, but I will focus a little bit on Kenya. Some quick statistics. As the UN, you know, I must come with some numbers. 80% of persons living with disabilities live in developing countries. And of course, they are just as badly affected by conflict, pandemics, disease, famine, and of course, the inevitable aging. So when we look at people with disabilities, we also almost in the same breath say older persons and people with disabilities, because it is 60 or so % that become disabled inevitably. And we saw the types of disabilities here. It is not strange. And I'm noticing more and more and more, especially in this country, Kenya, mental health issues as a result of all the stresses are really affecting people, and older persons are becoming, you know, dementia. So I have my mother, she's losing her memory every day, and it is an inevitable thing that we have to deal with. So what mandates do we follow as UN Habitat? The first one is the New Urban Agenda. And I would like all of you to write that down, New Urban Agenda. Google it. It's a really good document that was adopted globally in 2016 in Quito. And it is where member states pledged to eliminate discrimination and provide equal access to technology, employment, public services, including transport for persons with disabilities, including everybody else, and ensure their participation in decision making. And I think this really then becomes critical in times of emergency situations, whether it is war or just humanitarian situations, which we see all over the world, and you mentioned a few of them. UN Habitat Strategic Plan explicitly highlights 6 cross-cutting issues: human rights, gender, youth, children, older persons, and people with disabilities. So we've been concentrating on those 6 subjects, and more so people with disabilities and older persons, really deliberately since 2020. You know, our work involves a lot of advocacy and awareness raising, as well as projects. And I want to say that one of the really milestones that we had was our World Urban Forum in 2020, where we had in Katowice in Poland, was the first most inclusive world conference. And the reason that it was successfully so was because the administration, the minister, said this is going to be. So leadership starts from the top, and it works with it. So if people leading by example, that was really one very good conference that we can say we had diversity and inclusion. And I was going to say something about diversity and inclusion. It's now a very sexy subject, you know, but it's work that probably you've been doing, you've mentioned, for 16 years. But only now that they have termed it and given it a title of diversity and inclusion is there really a lot of emphasis. I wanted to talk about a few examples of the work that we've done. And the first one here, you can see from our slide, maybe next slide, should start with Bahrain. So I asked our country teams, can you share with me what successes you've had in yours? And the first one was actually, yes, Bahrain. They've faced a lot of earthquakes in the recent past. As a matter of fact, I don't know whether you know that. And they've been really working on strengthening accessibility and universal design, which is your thing, in public spaces. Why are public spaces important? People don't really give the emphasis that they should on public spaces. Public spaces is excellent for community building. It's good for relieving stress. It is good for children to play outside. It is good for everybody. And even in culturally sensitive places and countries that we work in, public spaces, you find a way to make it work. If Saudi Arabia, you can't mix, sit in the same, or be in the same space, or sit on the same side with both men and women, you have time slots. There's ways to make it work. So these are the kind of things that we are doing. The next one is Lebanon, using the block-by-block technology. I know many of you know block-by-block through games, but this really helped using this methodology in the inclusion and representation in the larger population. So you get young people to say what would they want? Children, what would they want? People with disabilities, what would you want in a space? And use the block-by-block technology. In Sharjah, the next one, accessible child-friendly city that we did in collaboration with UNICEF. And I think this partnerships, even inter-agency and inter-organization, is so important because, as you say, we can't do it all. Mozambique, I can give you an example for Africa. Mozambique is the next slide. You remember the cyclone? And this project has been running since 2012, but a lot of classrooms were built using technology and technical assistance from UN Habitat. And even with the subsequent cyclones that came, the buildings that we built were sturdy, and they lasted and proved that building properly with disasters in mind can make sure that your infrastructure can withstand future disasters. And the last example I'll give is Kakuma in Kalubei, in northern Kenya. Everybody said, Kakuma is just a temporary camp. It's not temporary, it's been there for decades. And I think even if it is a camp, a refugee camp, it has to be planned. It has to be designed to suit everybody. Right now it has over 200,000 people. Life on average, around 30 years in a camp. It's almost a lifetime. And UN Habitat has provided spatial planning and design support for this project, including building accessible model houses that can be redesigned. So you build the one you can, and on a modular fashion, you just go adding as the resources become available. So I think you have to make sure whatever is being designed or planned is something that is accessible, inclusive, suitable for all residents, including older persons and people with disabilities. So I'll stop there for now. We have short of time.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And when Angela and I were speaking with the amazing things that UN Habitat is doing, you always are criticizing yourself, oh God, I need to do more on this and more on that. But the mere fact that you're here, that you're putting this subject, this topic on the table and addressing it, accessibility is also about saying this is not accessible. Just so you'll know, it's on our list. We're doing it. And that's amazing. Rama, my dear friend, lead us in.
So thank you, Mikala. I've done many visual descriptions of myself in this conference, so you're probably sick and tired of hearing it. But just to say, I'm brown, male, and a friend of Mikal. And Mikal is a center of gravity, and that's a really good thing because she'll pull you in, but she'll always pull you into something good and interesting. And two things here, which relate to these sessions. One is the whole concept of disability leadership that we were just talking about came from a conversation we had on a coach in Israel and a pub in England, go figure. And we also spoke in the early days about the criticality of accessibility when you look at the extremes, when you go to the, absolutely the edges of human experience. So I haven't got a presentation for this, but I've made some notes. I think, quite often design doesn't do what it can because people don't want to push the boundaries. And the one thing I remember from our talk in December when you started talking about the color purple, and it's not a rock band's album, but it could be. And looking at this drive towards lighting up buildings and kind of bringing that color onto the vest was just the uncertainty of what was going on. But the real drive, the real value of the purple vest movement was the fact that it did it. And it wasn't looking for perfection. And I think, it was really summed up for me in poem by India's poet laureate, Rabindranath Tagore, who said, well, there was two things. He said, "What light does destiny have for her little children stumbling in the dark?" And the heavens responded, "A blind understanding." And it's that thing of just stepping forward without mapping everything, but actually having that kind of, heartbeat of what you do and that belief. And the other thing he said is, "Who will take up my work?" asked the setting sun. And throughout the land no one answered. Alone in the corner, dusty and forgotten, the earthenware lamp said, "I will, my Lord, as best I can." And that is, being dusty, being forgotten, that describes many, many people in these situations. And sometimes in accessibility, we can feel dusty and forgotten ourselves. So it's starting at your level. Your level is the right level. So I just really want to salute the work of Purple Vest, but spearheaded by the two characters, the two friends you see on stage. So just wanted to start off really with a round of applause for Purple Vest. Design. And, I've been also asked to focus on the kind of spatial side, the temporal side. And I think a couple of things is, the inventive nature of design can bring so much translational creativity to this area. It's not a topic that people broach. I know the war in the Ukraine has certainly brought a lot of things to the fore, like the murder of George Floyd did. And sometimes it takes that critical moment to really think of how do you respond. But, there's over 100 different conflicts across the globe, civil wars. And one of the things that design can really support is that scaling up, scaling across. We did a workshop that Michal and Yuval, the president of Access Israel, were involved in Zhlin, the city of Zhlin, and we had a number of Ukrainians there. One of the powerful things was to actually use the tools of design and creativity for people who were displaced to actually design back their space, their journey, and to take control of their space. So the first thing I wanted to say about space was space is an incredibly personal one. We talk about personal space. When people were on that refugee road, on that road of towards Poland, primarily, one of the things is space reduces. Your personal space reduces. And some of the teams there, and there was mayors, and there was a deputy mayor on the team, there was 19-year-old students. They came up with this thing of how can you carry your belongings with you, but how could your clothing actually become an expression of personal space, particularly for parents with young children. So a poncho that turns into a tent. And then, looking across the college I come from, the Royal College of Art, some of the student inventions have been incredible. So there was one that looked at tents, and again, as you very rightly said, temporary camps, or it can be anything but temporary. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But how can you have a sense of personal space to lock your valuables just to go to use a washroom, say? When people, when we look at those four angles, those four axes of exclusion of age, ability, gender, and race, particularly with ability, but with all of them, those exclusionary aspects are exacerbated within disaster and within exclusion. One other place that, and I know we were dealing with this, at the sort of temporary crossing and at the sort of welcome camp, simple things like gaps to get into showers, the fact that the showers were built for, festivals, music festivals, and not built with the width of a wheelchair in mind.
I'll just clarify and tell you that the camp that he's talking about was able to host 1,100 people. Think about people traveling 70 hours to get there. They come there, people with disabilities and the elderly, there is one accessible toilet and 0 accessible showers. That is where we contacted Rama and try to think, how do we change that? Can you imagine being hosed down after 70 hours because that's the only way you can wash yourself with all the hardship of the road?
I love that, because one of the things we were looking at is it's not just one moment of one situation of indignity. You're designing for several moments of indignity, of arriving, you're not able to wash your hand. And there was that really poignant video of a person with one leg having to operate a foot-operated tap, but it requires you with 2 legs, and the frustration of traveling for how many days and not being able to wash your hands, another moment of indignity. And these moments add up. You know, I studied engineering, and they said you need 9 small things to go wrong before the bridge collapses. And we were seeing, you know, accessible bridges collapse. I'm going to just take a couple more minutes in the interest of time, but another really interesting innovation is something called concrete canvas. And this came from that lack of accessibility, that needing to put together plywood or foam or kind of driftwood ramps. And the concrete canvas was a canvas that's sort of soaked in dry concrete. You can literally mold it to any shape, and then when you wet it, so you could inflate it, wet it, and it forms a concrete husk with an accessible entryway. So those guys are doing great. You know, they graduated about 15 years ago. So I think just a couple of examples, and just of design invention, and some personal examples just to touch upon. Which, speaking of, is a house or is it a home? After the 2011 tsunami in Japan in 2014. They invited us in to the city of Fukushima. And it was like a ghost town. It was like a movie. I don't know if you've seen that Will Smith movie, I Am Legend, but it was that. There were meals still on the table. There were shoes, bicycles tied up. There was one shop open. And, you know, I thought it was still radioactive, so I didn't want to go. But when the Japanese crown princess went, I was like, you know, yeah, I still want to have children someday, so I'll go. And one of the things we did, bringing in accessibility, bringing in inclusivity, was a workshop with the citizens about how they might return. And there were some really poignant stories there of a 92-year-old man who'd lived in that house. He was born in that house, and he didn't want to leave. So they couldn't make him leave, and then the police came to remove him, and he had taken his own life, because that is what home and space and situation meant. So one of the really, really important things as well is we were looking at the temporary housing, and there were sort of little attempts for people to make it a home. Flowers, vegetable patches. And one of the most powerful things that we did was actually involve the Center for Older People and the kindergarten to actually start to look at decorating that community, of how to bring people back in. Because it's really difficult when you're calling this place your home, but when you drive into it, you have bags of radioactive soil. You know, Japan being Japan, removed the top 3 or 4 inches of soil everywhere, and I don't know what they did with it, but there were bags of it next to the 7-Eleven. Next to the street-side shrine was a radioactive indicator. So the final point to end on is thinking about culture, thinking about context, thinking about difference, thinking about what does war look like when it's people who don't look like us, because we have a tendency sometimes to put that to one side. And I think that was one of the blessings, but also the challenges of Ukraine, is because it's on the doorstep of Europe, I think it galvanized a lot of Europeans. But why didn't this happen sooner?
Thank you very much. And I will connect here between our presenters, because the shower example that Rama said you remember I mentioned to you, it's taking the human factor and turning it into a human ramp. So the human ramp here, sitting next to me, when she went to Warsaw, the situation there was the same. There were no accessible showers. So her husband basically came with a measurement tape and built. Was it perfect? Probably not. Was it sufficient? Absolutely. Did it change lives? Definitely. And it's accessibility is always looking at the small details. You know, giving a person the feeling that even if it's not perfect, we see you. We see your needs. And in times of emergency, we want to help. And remember the 4 visuals that I showed you, the mirror, the wheel, the connecting the dots, and the ear. And what you heard here and saw here is just really the tip of the iceberg. First of all, I would love to invite you guys to contact us, Access Israel, Purple Vest. Join a training. Become the Purple Vester in your organization, in your country, in your city. Bring more people to learn, because eventually, you know, when the earthquake hit in Turkey, you know who the first responders who came to the rubble and tried to help? It was the neighbors. It was the next door neighbor. And another thing we need to remember is always to look at the big picture, because the responders came to the building that collapsed. What happened in the building that didn't collapse? Was there an elderly lady maybe that was waiting there for her caregiver that was under the rubbles and couldn't come and help, and she wasn't mobile, and she was stuck there for a week and nobody came to help? Nobody came with food? We have to think about the bigger picture and then focus on what we can make, what difference we can do. And believe me, each and every one of you can make a difference. And the experts sitting here, you know, first of all, they're friends and they're human beings. And I know that they're active with their hearts and they make a change every single day. So can you, and so do you. So join us, and note that Purple Vest is a logo of Purple Vest, not of Access Israel or any other organization. The idea is it's not about us, it's not ego. It's about helping, creating this universal, global connection of dots. So I would like to thank my fellow panelists. I would love to give each one of you an hour, but we have a very tough MC standing up already. I'm not looking in his direction, so it's not really happening, whatever is not in front of me. But I would like to thank you and thank Enable for giving us this opportunity and exposure. We're here, Shelley here, I'm here. Any questions you have, please feel free. And we couldn't have done it without our network and partners. Each and every one of you know who you are, and thank you for your assistance.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.